What if you've been living your entire life unaware of the untapped power lying dormant within you? This question burned into Eli's mind as he stumbled through the night, his heart racing with an adrenaline he couldn't explain. Something strange was happening to him. A sensation he had never felt before, an almost electric charge running through his body. It wasn't fear. It wasn't excitement. It was something much deeper, something primal. He couldn't shake the feeling that something inside of him was waking up. Eli had never been one for adventure. In fact, his life was an ordinary, predictable routine: get up, go to work, come home, sleep. He was content, if not entirely fulfilled. Yet, as he walked through the deserted city streets, he couldn't escape the sensation that tonight was different. The shadows felt heavier, the air more charged, as if something ancient was stirring in the world around him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from his sister, Lara. She'd been worried about him after he mentioned some unusual experiences that morning. But Eli hadn't shared everything. There was something even more strange, more unsettling, that he hadn't told her yet. The night seemed too quiet, but he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Then, just as he approached an empty alleyway, something caught his attention: movement, fast and deliberate. Before he could react, a figure stepped into view, blocking his path. Eli froze, his instincts kicking in, but the figure wasn't threatening. Instead, the woman smiled softly, her eyes gleaming with a knowing wisdom far beyond her age. "I've been waiting for you, Eli," the woman said, her voice calm yet somehow commanding. His heart skipped a beat. Who are you?" The woman's eyes shone with a strange light, and for a moment, Eli saw something flicker in her gaze, something familiar but impossible to place. "I'm Lara's ally. You've been chosen. Chosen to awaken what lies within you." Eli's mind raced. Chosen? Awakening? What was she talking about? "What are you saying?" he stammered, trying to back away, but the woman stepped closer, blocking his escape. "Humanity is not what you believe it to be," she said, her voice lower now, filled with an intensity that seemed to reverberate in the stillness of the night. "You're no ordinary man, Eli. You are one of the last of the warriors. You've been asleep for centuries, but now is the time for you to awaken." Eli's confusion deepened. "I don't understand. Warriors? What are you talking about?" The woman's smile widened. "It's time for you to remember. Everything you've known, everything you've been told, it's all a lie. You are a descendant of the gods of war, the protectors of humanity. And now, you must remember who you truly are." Eli felt a cold chill run through him, as if the world itself was changing around him. "I'm just a regular guy. I don't." "You're not," she interrupted, her voice sharper now. "But you will be. You must be. Your power is within you, waiting to be unlocked. If you're willing to accept it." Suddenly, Eli felt the weight of her words. It wasn't just her presence that was strange, it was the sensation growing inside of him, as though something deep within was responding to her. The force within him was waking, as if centuries of dormant strength were stirring beneath the surface. The woman reached out, placing a hand on Eli's chest. His body tensed, but he didn't pull away. The moment her hand made contact, his vision blurred, and the world around him seemed to collapse into flashes of past lives, flashes of battlefields, of swords and shields, of faces he'd never seen, yet felt intimately connected to. His mind was flooded with images of a distant time, of warriors, kings, and gods, his own face among them. His knees buckled as the rush of memories overwhelmed him. For a moment, he lost his balance, almost collapsing into the alley's cold stone wall, but the woman steadied him, her grip firm. "You feel it now, don't you?" she asked softly. "The power is awakening." I don't understand," Eli gasped, trying to regain his breath, his head spinning. "This is impossible. I'm just a man. You are more than you think, the woman said, her tone almost gentle. The power inside you is always there, waiting. And now, the time has come for you to face what lies ahead. With those words, Eli's world shifted again. The weight of what she was telling him was almost too much to bear, but there was no denying the truth in her eyes. Somehow, someway, he had been linked to something far greater than he had ever imagined. The woman leaned in closer, her voice barely a whisper. It's only the beginning, Eli. You are one of the last warriors. And the world needs you now. Before he could respond, she was gone. Vanished into the shadows as quickly as she had appeared, leaving Eli alone in the alley, his heart still racing. He stared at the empty space where she had stood, his mind reeling with the impossibility of it all. Was this some kind of dream? A hallucination? No, it felt real. The power surging inside him felt real. Eli took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind in his mind. But one thing was certain, nothing in his life would ever be the same again. As he turned to leave the alley, he couldn't shake the thought that kept echoing in his head, you are more than you think. And for the first time in his life, Eli wondered if perhaps that woman was right. What if he was connected to something ancient, something far more powerful than he had ever known? What if humanity's greatest secret, the sleeping warriors, was real? As the world around him seemed to shift, Eli knew that the next chapter of his life was just beginning. And whatever lay ahead, he would have to face it, whether he was ready or not. Eli's breath was shallow, his mind still spinning from the encounter. His feet moved almost on their own, as if guided by a force he couldn't comprehend. He had to get home, had to process everything that had happened. But even as he walked, his eyes darted nervously around the empty streets. The world felt different now, as though it had shifted imperceptibly, like a subtle change in the air that only a few could sense. As he reached his apartment building, Eli paused, staring at the door as if it held the answers he so desperately needed. He stepped inside, locking the door behind him, and collapsed onto his couch. The silence of the room felt suffocating, the weight of his new reality pressing down on him. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to make sense of the woman's words. Warrior, gods of war, chosen, his voice faltered. He was just an ordinary man, wasn't he? Or had he been living a lie all these years? Was it possible that everything he had known was only a small piece of a much bigger puzzle? His phone buzzed again, bringing him out of his daze. It was Lara, his sister. She had been calling him all evening after he had left the office. Eli picked up the phone with a shaky hand. Eli? Where are you? I've been trying to reach you. You disappeared after that call. I'm worried. Her voice trembled with concern, and it grounded him, pulling him back to reality. He needed to talk to her, to make sense of everything, but he didn't even know where to begin. How could he tell her that he wasn't who he thought he was? That he had just learned he was the descendant of ancient warriors, destined to wake up and face a world he hadn't known existed? I'm fine, Lara. I just needed some time to think, Eli said, his voice sounding far less convincing than he hoped. You don't sound fine, Eli. What happened? I know something's wrong. You're acting strange, she pressed, her tone soft but insistent. Eli sighed, running a hand over his face. It's complicated. I don't even understand it myself. Lara fell silent for a moment. Eli, whatever it is, you can talk to me. You know that, right? He paused, looking at the phone as if it held the key to unlocking the mystery. He wanted to tell her everything, but could he? Could he explain the strange woman, the power within him, and the visions of battlefields that seemed so real? Would she even believe him? I'll explain it to you, I promise. But not tonight, he said, hoping his words would bring some comfort. I just need some time. I'll be here when you're ready, she said softly, before ending the call. Eli sat in the darkness of his apartment, staring out the window at the city below. The world seemed so normal, so untouched, but Eli knew it wasn't. He had felt the power stir inside of him, a dormant force waiting to be unleashed. It was as if his entire life had been leading up to this moment, though he hadn't known it. He closed his eyes, trying to calm his racing heart. The woman's voice echoed in his mind, "You are one of the last warriors. The power is awakening." For hours Eli lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the implications of what had happened. The truth, whatever it was, seemed just out of reach, a tantalizing mystery he couldn't solve. All he knew was that his life had changed forever. The next morning, Eli found himself in his usual routine, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling of unease that had settled in his gut. He went to work, sat in meetings, and pretended to be the same man he had always been. But each moment felt like a lie, a facade. His mind kept drifting back to the alley, to the woman, to the stirring power inside him. At lunch, as he sat alone in the small cafe across from his office, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. He glanced around the room, but no one seemed to be paying him any special attention. Yet, the sense of being observed lingered, like a presence he couldn't see but could feel. Suddenly, a shadow fell across his table, and Eli looked up to find a familiar face standing in front of him. It was Mark, a former colleague from his old job. Eli hadn't seen him in years. Mark smiled warmly and took a seat without waiting for an invitation. "Eli, good to see you, man," Mark said, clapping him on the shoulder. "I've been meaning to catch up with you." Eli blinked, a bit taken aback by the sudden appearance. "Mark? What are you doing here?" "I just moved back into town," Mark said, his grin widening. "Thought I'd grab lunch with an old friend. You've been on my mind a lot lately. How've you been?" Eli hesitated, unsure of how to answer. He wasn't sure he even knew who he was anymore, let alone how to explain his life to anyone else. "I've been fine," he replied, his voice trailing off. "It's been a strange week, actually." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Strange how?" Eli hesitated again. What could he say? That he had been chosen to awaken as a warrior from a long-forgotten legacy? That his life was no longer his own? He had no idea how to explain any of it. "I just have a lot on my mind," Eli said finally. "A lot of changes." Mark studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I get it, man. Sometimes things happen that we don't expect, and it throws us off. But you know, that's life, right?" Eli nodded, trying to convince himself of the same thing. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe this was just some strange phase, some overwhelming stress that would eventually fade. But deep down, Eli knew that this feeling, this power, wouldn't go away. It had already started, and there was no turning back. Mark leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "Listen, Eli, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but there's a lot more going on in the world than most people realize. Hidden things. Forces at work that we can't even begin to comprehend. People like us, we're connected to something. Bigger. You might not know it yet, but soon you'll see." Eli froze. Those words sent a chill down his spine. Mark's cryptic statement felt like a confirmation of everything he had been experiencing. But what did it mean? Mark's grin returned. "But don't worry about it right now. Just keep your eyes open. The truth will come to you when the time is right." With that, Mark stood up, leaving Eli to his thoughts, and disappeared into the crowd of the cafe. Eli's hands trembled as he tried to process what had just happened. Mark's words echoed in his head like a warning, or perhaps an invitation to discover something that he wasn't ready for. But Eli had no choice. He had already taken the first step. The awakening had begun. The days following his encounter with Mark felt surreal. Eli's mind, once preoccupied with the mundane tasks of everyday life, was now consumed by a constant hum of uncertainty. Something inside him had shifted, like a piece of machinery suddenly clicking into place, and he was left grappling with a reality that no longer seemed quite so solid. His dreams became the only place where things made sense, or at least, where they started to. Each night, Eli found himself back on that same battlefield, but this time, he was no longer an observer. His feet moved with purpose, his body responding to some primal urge, and every swing of the sword felt like it was part of a larger rhythm, a deep, ancestral dance. The faces around him were unfamiliar, yet they were somehow comforting. He didn't know their names, but he knew they were his brothers and sisters in arms, fighting for something bigger than themselves. Eli would wake up each morning with his heart racing, drenched in sweat, his breath short as though he had just run a marathon. The weight of those dreams pressed on him during the day, like invisible chains pulling him toward something he couldn't yet grasp. One afternoon, after an unusually intense dream, Eli found himself staring at the city skyline, the sun casting long shadows over the streets. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his reverie. It was Lara again. "Eli," her voice cracked over the line, her worry palpable. "Are you okay? You've been acting so distant lately. You're not answering your texts, and when you do, it's like you're not really there. What's going on?" Eli closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her concern. It was hard to explain, to even understand himself, much less convey it to her. But one thing was clear, he couldn't continue living in this state of uncertainty. He needed answers, and Lara, always the grounded one, might just be the key to finding them. "I don't know how to explain it, Lara," Eli began, his voice soft. "It's like, there's this power inside of me. I feel it waking up, like a part of me that's been dormant for a long time. And these dreams. I'm seeing things that feel so real. I can't make sense of it." There was a long pause on the other end, and Eli could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. "Eli, this sounds crazy, but I've been researching some things," Lara said hesitantly. "I've been doing some digging into our family's history. And I think you might be onto something. There's a legend, a story passed down through our ancestors about warriors, ancient warriors with powers that they could unlock in times of need. I didn't know if it was true, but the more I read, the more I'm convinced it's real." Eli's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" "I don't know everything yet," Lara admitted, her voice uncertain. "But I'm starting to think that whatever's happening to you, it's not a coincidence. You're connected to something much older than we are. And the power you're feeling, it's the beginning of your awakening." Eli stood motionless, his mind reeling. He wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry at the absurdity of it all. How could this be happening? How could he, of all people, be tied to some ancient legacy of warriors? But deep down, there was something that resonated with what Lara was saying. He had felt it, the power, the pull towards something far beyond his comprehension. "Where do we start?" he asked, his voice steady despite the whirlwind inside. "I've been trying to locate something, an artifact, or maybe a place, that might hold the key to understanding this," Lara said. "I think we need to find it, Eli. It could be the answer to everything." For the first time in days, Eli felt a spark of hope. A direction. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't crazy. Maybe there was something real behind this power awakening inside him. As Eli ended the call, he looked out over the city again, but this time, he didn't feel so alone. His life was no longer a series of random events. There was something larger at play, something he was a part of. And whatever it was, he was ready to find out. The next few days were a blur of activity. Eli and Lara kept in close contact, working together to uncover more about their family's history. But as the days passed, Eli began to feel the weight of something far more immediate. The power within him was no longer dormant. It was restless, pushing against the boundaries of his control. It started with small things, objects shifting when he wasn't looking, strange sensations in his hands when he touched certain items. Then, one night, it happened. Eli had just finished dinner and was walking down the hall to his bedroom when he felt the air grow heavy. His heart began to race as the sensation in his hands intensified. He reached out to steady himself against the wall, but as his palm touched the surface, a jolt of energy surged through him. The wall cracked under the pressure, the plaster splitting like it was made of paper. Eli pulled his hand back, staring in shock at the damage. His breath caught in his throat. Had he done that? It was as if his very touch had manifested some unseen force, and it was terrifying. He backed away from the wall, his mind racing. What was happening to him? Was this just a fluke, or was the power truly awakening inside him? Just as he was about to regain his composure, there was a knock at the door. Eli froze. "Eli, it's me," a familiar voice called from the other side. It was Lara. His pulse quickened. Had she felt it too? Did she know what was happening? Eli opened the door cautiously, his eyes locking with hers. "I need you to stay calm," Lara said, her voice low but urgent. "We have to leave. Now." Eli's confusion deepened. "What do you mean? What's going on?" "There are people looking for you," Lara said, her gaze flicking nervously over his shoulder. "People who know about the power you're awakening. They won't stop until they have you, Eli. We can't wait any longer. We need to go." Eli's heart skipped a beat. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his body froze. Who were these people? And why were they after him? He didn't have time to think. Without a word, he grabbed his bag, and together, they fled into the night, unsure of what awaited them. The awakening had begun, and there was no turning back now. Eli and Lara's journey into the unknown was anything but calm. The streets they once walked with familiarity now seemed foreign, as if they were navigating through a maze of danger and uncertainty. The weight of their decision pressed heavily on Eli's chest, but there was no turning back. The realization that his life had taken a drastic turn left him with a constant knot in his stomach. As they ducked into alleys and avoided the watchful eyes of security cameras, Eli couldn't help but feel the ever-growing sensation of something out of his control. It wasn't just the energy that had surged through his hands the night before, there was a deeper pull, a magnetic force that seemed to guide his every move. It was as though he was being led by some unseen hand, pushing him forward into the unknown. "Where are we going?" Eli asked, his voice barely above a whisper as they crept through the darkened streets. Lara glanced over her shoulder, her face tense with worry. "We're heading to a safe house, an old family friend who knows more about this than I do. I'm hoping they'll have answers." Eli nodded, though doubt lingered in his mind. He trusted Lara, more than anyone else, but this was all too strange. Too impossible. He was just a regular guy, wasn't he? He'd been content with his life, his routine, and now, in a matter of days, his world had been turned upside down. It felt like he was caught in a whirlwind, one that he couldn't control, but could only try to survive. They made their way through the city, their footsteps muffled by the sounds of the night. The air seemed to grow thicker with every step they took, and Eli couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. A chill ran down his spine as he glanced around, scanning their surroundings. It was almost as if the shadows themselves were shifting, concealing something, or someone. Just as they reached the edge of the city, where the buildings began to thin and the streets grew quieter, a black SUV pulled up alongside them. The vehicle's tinted windows made it impossible to see who was inside, but Eli's heart skipped a beat when he saw the vehicle's silhouette. "Get down!" Lara hissed, pushing Eli into a nearby doorway. They ducked behind the building, their breaths shallow as they watched the SUV slow to a stop in front of them. The engine cut off, and for a moment, everything was still. Eli's pulse raced in his ears as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Who were these people? And why did they seem to know exactly where they were? Before he could react, the door of the SUV opened, and a tall figure stepped out. A man. His movements were deliberate, calculated, and he exuded an air of quiet authority. His face was hidden in shadow, but Eli could feel his presence, like an oppressive force, something dangerous. "Move," Lara whispered urgently, grabbing Eli's arm and pulling him further into the shadows. They hurried down an alley, the sound of footsteps behind them growing louder. Eli's mind raced. Who was this man? Was he the one responsible for the strange energy he'd been feeling? Was this the reason he'd been dragged into this? Who are they? Eli whispered, his voice barely audible. Lara didn't respond immediately, her eyes scanning the street ahead. They're part of a group that's been watching you. Watching our family for generations. I didn't want to tell you everything, Eli, but it's time. There's more to this than you can imagine. Eli's mind reeled. More? What could possibly be more than this? More than the power he had felt stirring inside him? More than the ancient legends Lara had uncovered? Everything was moving too fast, and his body couldn't keep up with the flood of information and emotions. They turned a corner, and the black SUV was nowhere to be seen. But the tension in the air remained, thick and heavy, as if something was lurking just beyond their sight. Lara stopped abruptly, her hand on Eli's arm. We need to talk. But we can't do it here. Without another word, she led him through a narrow gate and into an overgrown backyard. At the far end, an old, weathered house stood in silence. It was an unassuming place, tucked away from the world's prying eyes, but Eli had the feeling that it was hiding far more than it appeared. Lara knocked on the door 3 times, a secret code that Eli had never seen before. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly man with a weathered face and sharp, piercing eyes. He had the look of someone who had seen far too much, someone who had lived through things Eli couldn't even begin to understand. Lara, the man greeted her with a nod, then turned his gaze to Eli. And this must be the one. Eli swallowed hard, his throat dry. The one? The man nodded gravely. You're the one the power is awakening in. You've already felt it, haven't you? The strength that's been dormant inside you for all these years. It's not by chance, Eli. You've been chosen. Eli recoiled, his mind struggling to process the weight of the words. Chosen for what? What is all this? The man stepped aside, ushering them into the house. Come in. I'll explain everything. As they entered, the air inside the house felt different, cooler, charged with an energy that was both comforting and unsettling. The man led them to a small room at the back of the house, where an old map was spread out on a table, covered in symbols Eli couldn't decipher. This, the man began, is the key to everything. The power you're feeling, the ancient warriors your sister spoke of, they were real. They were not just legends. They were protectors, guardians of humanity, chosen to awaken when the world needed them most. And now, Eli, that time has come. Eli's heart pounded in his chest as the pieces began to fall into place. His family, the strange dreams, the unexplained energy, it was all connected. He was part of something bigger than he could have ever imagined. You've only begun to scratch the surface of your potential, the man continued. But be warned, Eli. The forces you've awakened are not without consequence. There are others who seek to control this power, and they will stop at nothing to claim it. The room seemed to close in around Eli as he tried to make sense of the words. This was no longer just a strange chapter in his life. This was the beginning of something far larger, and far more dangerous. But deep down, despite the fear, Eli knew one thing for certain, he wasn't going to back down. Whatever awaited him, whatever forces were closing in, he would face them head-on. And so, With a steady breath, Eli braced himself for what was coming next. The next few days passed in a blur for Eli. His mind was constantly racing, trying to make sense of the revelations that had turned his life upside down. The old man, whom Lara called the Guardian, had explained enough to keep Eli's curiosity burning, but there were still so many questions left unanswered. Why had he been chosen? And what was this ancient force that seemed to be tied to his very existence? Lara had taken him to a secluded spot near the edge of town, a small training camp where the most elite members of their secret group, the Keepers, were stationed. It wasn't much to look at, a cluster of old buildings surrounded by a high fence, but Eli could feel the weight of history in the air. This was where warriors like the ones from the legends had once trained, honing their skills in preparation for battles that, Eli now understood, had never truly ended. "This is where you'll begin," Lara said, her voice a mix of determination and concern as they stood outside the entrance to the camp. "But it's not going to be easy. You won't be handed anything. Not the answers, not the power, not even your survival." Eli met her eyes. He had no choice but to follow this path. He didn't know what would happen if he didn't, but the pull inside him was too strong. He felt like he was being pulled towards something bigger, something that had been waiting for him his entire life. As they walked through the camp, Eli noticed the stark contrast between the weathered buildings and the intense energy that seemed to vibrate through the air. The people here were different. They weren't just ordinary individuals, there was a fire in their eyes, a shared knowledge of something unknown to the outside world. And among them were some of the strongest warriors Eli had ever seen, women and men who carried an air of both authority and humility. They led him to a small, dimly lit room where an older man stood waiting, his hands clasped behind his back. He was tall, built like an oak tree, with eyes that seemed to burn with a quiet fury. "You're the one they've been talking about," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "You're the one who has awakened." Eli swallowed hard, his throat dry. "What does that mean?" "It means you've inherited the power of the ancient protectors. You are part of something much larger than you could ever imagine. And it's time you learned what that really means." The man turned and motioned for Eli to follow him. As they walked down a narrow hallway, Eli couldn't help but feel like he was walking deeper into the unknown. His feet moved mechanically, his heart pounding in his chest. Every step seemed to take him closer to something he wasn't ready for, but at the same time, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was where he was meant to be. They stopped in front of a large steel door. The man turned to Eli and said, "Inside is where you'll begin to understand. But be warned, Eli, this isn't a test of strength alone. It's a test of your heart, your resolve. The power you're about to face isn't like anything you've ever known. It will challenge everything you believe about yourself." Eli nodded, his mind swirling with uncertainty. But he felt something inside him that he couldn't ignore, something that urged him to press forward, to see what lay beyond that door. With a deep breath, Eli stepped inside. The room was vast, its walls lined with ancient symbols and weapons. It was clear that this was no ordinary training room, it felt like a temple, a sacred space meant to hold something far more important than simple physical training. In the center of the room, there was a raised platform where a single object sat under a sheet of cloth. "This," the man said, "is the artifact that will awaken your true potential. It's an ancient relic, one that was passed down through generations of warriors. Only those chosen can touch it. But it won't be easy, Eli. If you're not ready, it will reject you." Eli looked at the object, the faint sense of power emanating from it. The room seemed to hum with an energy he could almost feel in his bones. Without thinking, he stepped forward. His hand reached out toward the relic, and as his fingers brushed against the fabric, an immense surge of energy exploded through him. For a moment, everything went dark. When Eli opened his eyes, he found himself standing in a vast, desolate landscape. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of burning ash. The ground beneath his feet was cracked and lifeless, stretching out to the horizon in every direction. There was no sign of life, no sound, just the oppressive silence. "Where am I?" he whispered, his voice barely audible in the vast emptiness. A voice answered, soft but clear. "You're in the heart of the power you've awakened, Eli. This is the battlefield of your ancestors." Eli turned sharply, looking for the source of the voice. There, standing before him, was a figure dressed in ancient armor, its face obscured by a helmet. The figure's eyes, however, glowed with an eerie light. "You are the heir," the figure continued. "The one who will either lead us to victory or doom us all." Eli's heart raced, his chest tight with confusion. "Lead you? What do you mean? Who are you?" The figure stepped forward, and Eli could now see the glint of ancient symbols carved into the armor. "I am a guardian of the old world, a protector of humanity's greatest warriors. The power you feel inside you, Eli, it is not just a gift. It is a curse. You must learn to control it, or it will destroy you." Before Eli could respond, the world around him began to shift. The barren landscape faded, replaced by scenes of war, of ancient battles fought by the very warriors who had once wielded the power that now flowed through him. "You must understand, Eli," the figure said, its voice growing stronger, "that the power you possess has always been a double-edged sword. It is meant to protect, but it can also destroy. The choice is yours: will you use it to save humanity, or will you let it consume you like it has consumed so many before you?" Eli stood frozen, his mind spinning with the weight of the figure's words. The ancient battles, the guardians, the power, it was all so overwhelming. But he knew one thing for certain: this was his responsibility now. He had no choice but to face it head-on. Eli stood in the midst of the battle, the weight of the world pressing down on him. The figure who had spoken to him, the guardian, remained by his side, its glowing eyes locked onto him with unwavering intensity. "Do you see it now?" the figure asked, its voice echoing in Eli's mind. "This is the fate that awaits all who carry the power you possess. It is a gift, yes, but it comes with a price." Eli swallowed hard, his throat tight with fear and uncertainty. The scenes unfolding around him were unlike anything he had ever imagined. He saw warriors, both men and women, fighting with unparalleled strength, their bodies moving in ways that seemed unnatural. They wielded powers that were beyond human comprehension, but each victory came at a terrible cost. A warrior, her armor glowing with an ethereal light, struck down an enemy with a single blow. But as the dust settled, Eli saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the deep toll the battle had taken on her. She fell to her knees, blood seeping from a wound that had been ignored in the heat of the fight. "This is the reality, Eli," the guardian continued, its tone solemn. "The power you are about to wield can save or destroy. It amplifies your every emotion, your anger, your fear, your desire for victory. And in doing so, it can tear you apart from the inside out. It's not a power that can be controlled easily." The battlefield shifted, and Eli found himself standing in front of a colossal beast. It was unlike anything he had seen before, its massive form covered in scales that shimmered like obsidian. Its eyes burned with an ancient, predatory hunger, and it charged toward him with terrifying speed. Before Eli could react, the figure stepped forward, blocking his path. "This is your trial, Eli. You must face it. This beast is a reflection of your inner conflict, the struggle between your humanity and the power inside you. Only by overcoming it will you be able to control the power that threatens to consume you." Eli's heart pounded in his chest. The beast before him was more than just a physical threat, it represented everything he had been warned about. The power inside him, he could feel it surging, responding to the beast's challenge. His instincts screamed at him to fight, to unleash everything he had learned and been given, but the guardian's words echoed in his mind: "It can destroy you." Taking a deep breath, Eli focused on the beast's movements. It was fast, too fast, but it was also predictable. He saw its pattern, its weakness. The ancient warriors who had fought before him hadn't relied on brute strength alone, they had been masters of discipline, patience, and strategy. Eli moved, his body responding without thought. It felt like the power inside him was guiding him, urging him to act, to strike with precision. His fist connected with the beast's jaw, sending it reeling back. But it wasn't enough. The beast roared, its massive form lunging at him with ferocity. The world seemed to slow as Eli's mind raced. This isn't just a fight against the beast, he realized. It's a fight against myself. With that realization, something inside Eli clicked. The power surged within him, but he didn't let it consume him. Instead, he focused it, shaping it into something controlled, something purposeful. He moved with purpose, anticipating the beast's every move, using his mind to guide his body. The final blow came when Eli ducked under the beast's swipe and drove his fist into its chest. A shockwave of energy radiated outward, sending the creature crashing to the ground. For a moment, the world stood still. Eli stood over the fallen beast, his chest heaving with exertion. The power inside him had not only allowed him to defeat the creature, it had also helped him understand something crucial. The struggle was never just about defeating enemies, it was about mastering the power within. The guardian appeared beside him, its voice deep and approving. You have passed the trial, Eli. You've learned control, not just over the power, but over yourself. This is the beginning of your true awakening. But Eli wasn't sure if he was ready for what came next. The weight of his newfound power still felt heavy on his shoulders. Yes, he had faced the beast, but the real battle, his inner battle, had only just begun. The scene around Eli shifted once again, and he found himself back in the training camp, standing before Lara. She was watching him closely, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt or fear. You did it, she said, her voice filled with a mixture of pride and concern. You passed the first test. But the hardest part is yet to come. Eli nodded, his mind still reeling from what he had just experienced. He had felt the power inside him, the power that had been passed down through generations of warriors, and for the first time, he felt like he was truly connected to something larger than himself. But there was still so much he didn't understand. Lara seemed to read his thoughts. I know you have questions. I know you're wondering if you're truly ready. But remember, Eli, you're not alone in this. We are all here to guide you, to help you understand your purpose. Eli looked at her, his resolve hardening. What's next? Lara gave him a knowing smile. Next, we prepare for what's coming. The power inside you is awakening, and with it, the enemies who have been waiting for this moment. But now, you're ready. And together, we will face whatever challenges lie ahead. The weight of his destiny still hung heavy on his shoulders, but for the first time, Eli felt ready to face it. The road ahead would be long and filled with danger, but he was no longer just a boy caught in the crossfire of a war he didn't understand. He was a warrior, someone who would rise to the challenge, no matter what it took. The battle for humanity's future was just beginning. And Eli would be at the heart of it, fighting not only for his survival, but for the survival of all mankind. The air was thick with the remnants of battle. Smoke curled around the shattered remains of the collective stronghold, and the distant hum of energy weapons faded into eerie silence. Eli stood at the heart of it all, breathing heavily, his body worn but his spirit unyielding. The final confrontation had pushed him beyond anything he thought possible, yet here he stood, alive, victorious, and forever changed. Lara approached him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and pride. You did it, Eli. No, he corrected, scanning the broken battlefield. We did it. Humanity did it. But despite their victory, a heavier truth settled on Eli's shoulders. The fight had not just been against the collective, it had been against humanity's own apathy, its willingness to remain asleep, unaware of the power buried deep within. The battle may have ended, but the war for humanity's awakening had only just begun. A world forever changed. In the aftermath, news of the collective's downfall spread like wildfire. Governments, once unwittingly controlled by the shadowy organization, were in disarray. The truth about the ancient warrior lineage of humanity leaked to the public, igniting a storm of debate, fear, and hope. People across the world began to question everything they had been told about their own limitations. Lara and Eli found themselves at the center of it all. They were no longer just fugitives or rebels, they were symbols of change. What happens now? Lara asked as they stood atop a ruined tower, looking out at the city below. Eli remained silent for a long time before answering. Now, we give them a choice. With the collective gone, there was no longer anything stopping humanity from reclaiming its forgotten heritage. But the question remained, would they? The test of free will. Eli knew the truth. Power without purpose was dangerous. Awakening the warrior spirit in humanity would not guarantee a golden age, it would only guarantee the opportunity for one. Some would embrace it, others would fear it, and some would seek to misuse it. Not everyone will want this, Lara warned. Some will reject it. They should have that right, Eli replied. We don't force them. We show them. Using the ancient knowledge they had uncovered, Eli and Lara began spreading the truth in a way the collective never would. They shared knowledge, history, and techniques to awaken the dormant strength in those who sought it. Some listened. Others dismissed it as fantasy. But in the eyes of a few, soldiers, scientists, leaders, ordinary people alike, Eli saw something different. He saw understanding. He saw belief. The final message. Standing before a gathering of people eager to learn, Eli took a deep breath. These were the first of many who would follow. Maybe not all of humanity would awaken at once, but this was a start. He looked at them and spoke from his heart. You have been told your entire life that you are ordinary. That you are weak. That the struggles of this world are too great for you to fight. That is a lie. He paused, letting the words sink in. Inside you is the same fire that burned in the hearts of warriors before time was recorded. It has never left you, it only sleeps. But now, you have a choice. Do you stay asleep, content with what you've been given? Or do you wake up, rise, and become something greater? The crowd was silent. Then, one by one, they began to stand. Their eyes burned with a new determination. It was only the beginning, but Eli knew, this was how change started. Not with a single battle, but with a spark. And with that spark, humanity's sleeping warrior spirit began to awaken.